Hi everyone. Hi. My name's Ian Allison. I cover enterprise blockchain for CoinDesk, and I'm joined here today by a group of illustrious technology visionaries and pragmatists. I'm going to let them go through and introduce themselves, starting with Ben here.
So I'm Ben Beckman. I'm a senior computer scientist up at GE Global Research. Over the last few years, I've been responsible for the blockchain practice for the General Electric company. So both educating and promulgating the technology and then coming up with IP strategies that fit within the General Electric company.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Ulrich, based in Hong Kong. I'm with the GSMA Association, and we are the trade organization representing about 800 mobile operators around the world. So in Hong Kong, I'm looking at ways that we can use blockchain in helping our operators and the wider ecosystem become more competitive and efficient in the work that they do.
Hi, I'm Mike Jacobs, and I lead our blockchain practice at the United Health Group. It's one of the largest healthcare insurance companies. I'm also a co-founder of the Synaptic Health Alliance, and my overall role is to ensure that the blockchain technology is being used appropriately in the healthcare context.
Great. Hi, I'm Ron Resnick, the Executive Director of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And in addition to that, we're now launching an initiative tied to tokens, a token initiative that's neutral to all technologies. So we're going to have two activities that we'll talk probably about a little bit during this session.
Great stuff. Well, I was thinking before we dive into some quite disparate use cases, it might be useful for all of us to just go through what we this term in the title, Industry 4.0, which I've heard, used quite a lot in quite a few different contexts, and it's one of these kind of terms of art, technical terms of art. Maybe just start with you, Ben. What does it mean to you, and what's your take on Industry 4.0?
Sure. So GE is the largest industrial producer of additive manufacturing parts. So some of the planes that you flew on today or later actually have those parts in them, and they're critical to the engine performance. The way that we produce those parts today is we do them predominantly in-house. However, we want to expand our supply chain outside of the boundary of the General Electric company. And so working with standards such as what comes out of Industry 4.0 to be able to communicate with these machines, trust them, produce certified parts, and buy them back from our supply base is something that's of very much interest to us.
My understanding is that the Industry 4.0 is the fourth industrial revolution, which we are now entering, and it's sort of the combination of the digital, the physical, the biological. From a telecom perspective, it meshes well with 5G, which is the fifth generation of mobile telephony, which again we are entering this year in a big way. Dozens of countries are launching 5G technology, and it will bring three main improvements to the way that mobile telephony operates. One is a vastly quicker or higher capacity. The other is ultra-reliable low latency for things like automated driving, remote surgery. And the third is massive Internet of Things, where Internet of Things are connected devices. So now that we're going to an age, right now we have probably 20 to 30 billion connected devices worldwide. It's rapidly increasing. And this 5G will enable 1,000 times increase in the density of connected devices per square kilometer. So it'll be a big change, and we'll be seeing that within the next few years. And
yeah, so for me, clearly my focus is in the healthcare space. In the U.S., healthcare spend is about 15% of GDP, with an inflation rate greater than the standard economic inflation rate. So there's ample opportunity for shifting our mindset around how healthcare is delivered, specifically around privacy and the rights to information and the effectiveness of sharing that information for better healthcare outcomes. And so I envision somewhat of a topsy-turvy kind of transition in the healthcare space around who owns that data, who has control of consent of that information, how is that used downstream in our processes.
Great. As far as I see it, this means that this fourth industrial whatever they call it, is going to be, to me, it's all about new business models and ripping out old business models and seeing who survives. And it's going to be just, I think the disruption is not even started compared to how it's going to evolve. And it'll be very interesting to see 5 or 10 years from now which companies are really going to get it, because what I've noticed, there's a fair amount of management who find this kind of innovation difficult to comprehend and to make business decisions to change and modify their infrastructure and how they do it and why they do it is going to be challenging, and some companies who you think are going to be successful will and others won't. Tied to that, what we do in our org, and I've spent 12 years at Intel in the side of telecommunications as well. We chatted where we're very standards oriented, and so I'm a big proponent and champion of interoperability. So wherever you go, everyone is using the same kind of language, and I'll talk a little more about it, to make it work. And right now in the world of blockchain, that's not happening. And so I think we'll see over the next few years, I hope, that a coalescence of the folks realizing if I don't do this, I don't work towards global interoperability, interworking, we're not going to make any money because we're not going to reach all the markets we need to address. So, so I'm hoping part of that future roadmap includes, or it will, but it depends when, it gets to that route where there is interoperability, a standard that can be certified and tested toward, so we can make the whole notion of how the folks who sell their solutions trustless, which is a unique word, as trustless as everybody hopes blockchain is.
I think one thing, I mean, one of the challenges probably of this panel is to rein together some of these quite disparate sort of areas, and staying at that sort of end of the room a little bit. I mean, Mike, you were talking about this idea that patients can kind of own their own data, not so much monetize it, but they be incentivized, right? And this was one area that we saw a cross-pollination with this idea of tokens to incentivize things that Ron's talking about. I mean, I think we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there's a potential there, right?
Yeah, so I mentioned the topsy-turvy aspect. I see that the industry is going to hopefully shift its focus on the ownership of information. Today, at least in the US, your patient data that your doctor has is owned by the doctor's office in 49 out of the 50 states. It's not your data. There's a lot of movement toward providing access to your information in an easy way, but ultimately, ultimately that information makes its way to areas you don't even know about. Recently, I read in the news that there was a breach of healthcare information at a company that insurance companies didn't know existed. And how did my healthcare patients were receiving letters saying, "Oh, you've been subject to a breach," and they're like, "How did my information even get there?" And the general idea around the transformation is to address a couple problems. As you move from employer to employer, you may move from doctor's office to a different doctor's office, leaving behind islands of your healthcare information. And if that information is not accessible by your other doctors, you may not get the complete care that you deserve. And what a blockchain technology could ultimately provide is a way for bringing those islands of information together by providing a single access point for all of your healthcare information. Then the second aspect that I think where tokens will fit in is in the area of patient engagement. And patient engagement has to do with the fact that roughly 80% of many episodes of care within the healthcare is due to patient behavior. Too much smoking, too much drinking, not exercising, overeating. Many of those chronic conditions are a result of behavioral changes that through patient engagement and reinforcement, some sort of incentive mechanism, could potentially improve the overall healthcare delivery.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that in healthcare, there's so much AI, there's so much being done with AI. You've got IBM Watson and so on, that the net gain would be vast, you know, for everyone if you could get that data structured and shared.
Sure. So, yeah, so getting more data in an artificial intelligence learning kind of scenario, yeah, that would certainly help with sort of automating and identifying key patients that need more attention than others. But the other aspect that I hope to see after the tokenization and patient engagement is one of, if the patient owns their information, there's the opportunity for them to monetize that information. And there's a lot of downstream implications here with the ability for example, clinical trials research organization, clinical research organization, or CROs, are responsible for recruiting patients into clinical trials, and much of the work has to do with finding the right slice of population with the right chronic conditions that are candidates for a particular drug. If that information is available more holistically, the cost of and effectiveness of those clinical trials can improve. And generally, patients would be able to monetize their information for the purposes of AI training for other purposes.
Sure. Ben, kind of staying slightly in the healthcare realm for a moment, I was really, I don't know if you can talk about it, the thing that we mentioned, there was a healthcare use case that used a blockchain to administer as an alternative kind of pharmaceutical treatment, right? Can you talk about that?
So recently we released a paper in Nature about an alternative to some pharmaceuticals.
Fascinating.
So there's devices that we sell that we're currently in clinical trials trying to show that they can be used instead of these particular pharmaceuticals, and turns out that the devices and the cost of the pharmaceuticals are pretty different. And so you want to be able to keep track of the use of these types of therapies. Are people overusing it? Are they complying to how the therapies are supposed to be used?
It's like a kind of, just remind me, what is it again exactly, the thing?
There's a few different modalities, but that paper covers ultrasound.
Ultrasound, right, yeah, yeah, sure. And you use a blockchain to monitor the use of that thing?
Yeah, so this would be a way that you could do a therapy in your car, at your home, places like that. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that people are using these appropriately, right? So when you get a pill bottle and you go home with it, the doctor doesn't really know when the consumption happened. You tell them, hopefully accurately, but this gives you a much better record and a lot more control over how these things are being used.
And back in the world of kind of manufacturing and 3D printing and all that stuff that you've been doing with GE, I thought it was pretty interesting how you were saying, like, right at the forefront of this 4.0 revolution are German technologists, and it's a bit like the kind of Mittelstand guys that are really, I thought that was really interesting. They're driving this space pretty hard.
Yeah, so depending on what history you follow, there's Industry 4.0, which is very standards related, and then there's another one that GE is a big participant in called the Industrial Internet Consortium, which is focused heavily on the business models and getting the groups of people together to actually produce an industrial internet. And so if you think about an additive manufacturing part that goes in an aircraft, that if it failed, there could be an issue, you want to be highly certain that the parts aren't getting reproduced in ways that you don't desire, that they're the exact version of the part that should be being produced, and that you can certify the quality of these. And so one way to do that is to own the whole thing. You know, that's good for now, but you want to be able to broaden that. You want to be able to allow this technology to be used for many, many other things. And so that's where we're focusing, is how can you transact from a machine to go get rights for parts, go deliver the part to the machine in a way that it can be controlled, and that you're certain that the part that comes out of that machine is the authentic part that you need, so that there's no issues that pop up later.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the extremely pertinent, you know, the fact that Boeing's had these issues and it's dreadful, and this is addressing that. But also, I was really interested to hear that there is, in fact, they call it the boneyard in Texas, of just all these aircraft parts that they can't use because the certification isn't there, or it's paper-based, or it's floating around. And, you know, this is worth many, many millions of dollars, and it's just sat there, all this orphaned inventory. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's in everyone's interest in this room that we keep a good control over what parts go into aircraft, what parts go into healthcare equipment. And so, you know, blockchain, obviously, as you've heard over the course of the week here, is really good at that type of technology, and it doesn't need to be centrally controlled with one particular organization empowered. It can actually be done in a way where you can provide proof that you're doing the thing correctly, and now you can have a very high confidence that the way that these devices are being used and the parts that are going into them are how they're supposed to be.
Good stuff. And while we were talking about some of these 5G use cases that are super interesting, and IoT is just this, I mean, it's its own conference, right? But I thought it was, you were talking about Korea, people using blockchains, for example, to stop hacking and...
Right, yeah.
Sure.
Korea is one of the most innovative countries in the world, and it's the furthest along in 5G. So a few weeks ago, Korea Telecom, one of the 3 telecom providers, mobile operators, started using a blockchain to protect IoT devices, to mask or hide the IP addresses so that hackers cannot get at them. And as some of you, if you're familiar with cybersecurity, the weak link in the chain of protection is typically the IoT devices, because they're often small, they don't have a lot of computing power or protection built into them, and some have like generic passwords and so forth. So that's a very important use of blockchain. And also for healthcare data, that's actually the most valuable personal data that hackers want to steal.
Dark web, right? Yeah.
And so that has to be really carefully protected as well. Yeah. And one other thing I'd just like to mention about business models, and the title of this talk was Business Models for a New State of Play. So I've been learning a bit more about gaming, online gaming, and there was a talk an hour ago by a company called Thundercore, and he laid out his strategy of rapidly increasing the number of users that the game has compared to, say, the EOS platform or the Ethereum platform, or I think it was called Tron. And you know, one of his issues was, for gaming at least, scalability wasn't the main concern. It was attracting more users to the platform. So he was using what we would call a classic multi-sided platform strategy, where you know, you have you want to get more users, more providers or developers of apps. How do you do that? Well, you have to provide value to both sides of that platform, and then a third side would be advertisers. So they were following sort of the strategy of the big players like Amazon or you know, Google and so forth, or Alibaba, that initially they're not going after profits and they're losing money initially, but they're going sort of for a blitzkrieg or a blitz scaling effect to rapidly build a large platform of users on both sides with advertisers as a third side, and hope that that can then you know, generate profits. And they're using their own token in this gaming system. So I asked him, you know, when are you going to get revenues, or what's your business model? And he said, well, as we have more users, that should increase the value of the token. I'm an economist by training, so I'm kind of skeptical of that argument, that just by supply and demand you can raise the value of your token and bring value that way. So, but I am quite interested in what Ron's organization, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, is doing. Their recently announced token taxonomy initiative, which is not per se to encourage, you know, cryptocurrencies and so forth, but is another interesting way to help the ecosystem.
Sure, yeah, Ron. We want to know more about the token taxonomy, because it's great that you've got R3. I mean, I know you guys were working quite closely with Hyperledger already. That's not news, but it's very interesting that you're getting guys like R3 and R3 who have, in the past, let's be fair, been quite critical of Ethereum in some ways, in enterprise anyway. So yeah, talk about it.
So as I mentioned earlier, there are different clients, and you have R3, you have Hyperledger Fabric, and you have Ethereum clients. So that's not what this is all about. Those are clients. But to me, the bigger opportunity in the world truly are tokens. And of course, tokens in there's a bad side to how folks understand what a token is, which is what you just brought up, cryptocurrency and speculative, which is not what we're about. So what ended up happening about 2 months ago, we were approached by actually Microsoft's on our board and some others, and said, look, we're calling in all these customers, and tokens are extremely technical and complicated to figure out. And so they've been working on how to explain a token in language that is understandable, and language that is not tied to any technology. So, our board at the EA agreed that we would host, so it's independent from the EEA. We would just host using our GitHubs and our other assets that we have to help promote the bigger picture, which is a universal language for describing tokens that could be any technology. And so, we talked to IBM and, of course, R3, Digital Asset, everyone, and they loved it. So we ended up working for the last month on an announcement, and that was the harder part, putting the announcement together. And so we ended up getting, the announcement went out about 2 weeks ago, whereby we're describing tokens by, in a simple way, whether, and even the terminology here can be challenging, but we'll make it as easy as possible. Whether it's fungible or
it's like a token garage, right? You've got a token garage.
We have basically a language, like the language of music. You have 13 notes, you have rules, how to create it. Wherever you go in the world, it works. We're doing the same thing on tokens, and we're tracking everyone. So we have the major players, all the major banks. We're talking to telecom, and the reason why is the worst thing that I think we want to see happen is any one major industry, and it could be telecom, it could be automotive, it could be health, think that everything has to center around that particular use case and how identity is set and for a token. It would be great if that language was universal, because with telecom and banking, there's payments that have to happen, there's all kinds of things that have to happen. So that's what we're doing. And actually tomorrow we have a public webinar. If you go to, we got the domain, tokentaxonomy.org, because no one else would want it. And
so I'm going to invoke my powers as moderator. Sorry, Ron. Sorry to cut across you there, but we're just coming right to the end.
So I'll finish up. So bottom line, this is what we're doing, and anyone's interested, check it out.
Thank you. Good
How's
stuff.
That?
Very good. And so just to kind of bring us in, rein things together, when we talk about this stuff, Industry 4.0, there's maybe a risk that you leave the pragmatism and become rather kind of look at this utopian kind of vision of the future. But I still think it's worth speculating about how things are going to go. And so maybe start with you, Ben. How do you see things progressing in the next 5 sort of years with this technology and the combination of different technologies, the ones that you come?
So we're in a large equipment manufacturer. Most of those equipment are critical to your everyday life, right? A third of the world's power comes from us. It's an issue if those things go down. And so it's not out of the realm of possibilities that the machine can actually understand when an issue is arising. So vibrations could occur or something else, and they could, on their own, determine when they should ask for maintenance or order parts, things like that. And so in the additive case, the IP that we have out there talks about maybe these larger machines do identify an issue, they place an order for a part, and then the machines on the other side can actually decide whether or not I should produce that part. Does it fit in my build volume? Do I have the right material? Am I going to make enough money if I do this? Am I close to where it needs to be? Using these types of systems, you have the ability to see across and within organizations, and you can actually do this for real today. We just have to get it out, deployed within these systems.
Very cool. Mike?
I'd just say that as the world is increasingly interconnected, blockchain will assume over the next 5 years an ever more important role in securing data, in protecting data of people. And I think it will become just a background technology we won't notice, we may not talk about as much. Just the way that we don't talk about HTML or HTTPS, the background technologies of the internet. So that's the way I think we're going, and it's just trying to convince people to get over some of the terminology. Many people still don't understand it. Some even still confuse it with Bitcoin or whatever. But to the extent that we can, show the utility, and I think it is a great way to make systems, make collaborative economies and ecosystems work together.
Stuff, Mike?
Yeah, so I think the success of these emerging business models is going to have a lot to do with incentives and aligning incentives. And I find that, at least today, the idea of aligning incentives is kind of glossed over. And over the next couple of years, I hope to see more formalization around the use of behavioral economics and game theory to more formalize how we go about best practices about actually doing this aligning incentives.
Really good. Ron?
Okay, so I believe that the more that we can work towards interoperability and creating a model where the customers of vendors can trust it across all industries that's happening. And at the end game, though, is if we can do that, then the next steps would be to we get it's called qualified custodians, folks who can really, it's like an escrow, how they can hold information and protect it, and then insurance companies, which is going to be a challenge, and that's a big challenge to back some of this stuff. And at the end of the day, the most important one are the regulators. And so I think they're starting to get it, but it's going to still be a while. But I think we need to show a unified approach to how we present what we're doing, so the regulators feel like they don't have a choice. They have to take some action because they usually move slow.
Well, I'm with you, Ron. I'm an Ethereum enthusiast as well. So, but listen, great panel. Give them a round of applause. Thanks.